next speaker is April Soetarman. April is a designer, a maker, and musician. She graduated with a double major in architecture and music from UC Berkeley, and then helped to establish the program based on experiential education as one of the founding students of the Experience Institute. Since 2013, she has been working with the design and engineering firms across the country on everything from exhibit design to large-scale public art and sound art installations. She is currently with Studio 7, the Experience Design and Environmental Graphics Design Studio at NBBJ in Seattle, where she makes art and tech for the built environment. She likes dancing, riding bikes, reading comics, baking pies, and urban sketching. And yes, she was born in April. Please welcome April Soetarman.
Sound? No? There's a sound clip, I swear. So that is one of my favorite sounds ever. For all of you who've been to concerts, that's the sound of the orchestra tuning as all the different instruments all meet on one pitch. So my name's April. Today I'm going to be talking about using different mediums, including sound, to tell stories. So first I'm going to tell a little bit about me, where I come from and what I do on the side, and then how that feeds into all the other work I do, including sound work. I just realized my intro sort of sounds like a dating profile. Like it says, oh, I like going dancing and riding bikes and comics and recording weird bird noises and playing them back to people in weird spaces. Anyway, so as you've heard a couple times already today, I have a formal background in both music and architecture. When I was 5 years old, I decided I wanted to be an architect. It's also the year I started playing piano. When I was 10, though, I wrote in the 5th grade yearbook, I want to be CEO of a computer firm. However, when I was 16, I wrote in my journal, I had a journal, that I wanted to be a starving artist. So I think I can maybe satisfy my 5-year-old self, my 10-year-old self, and my 16-year-old self. So when I say I double majored in music and architecture, it sounds like I was super dedicated and I was super passionate, and I guess those things are true, but there's actually one really small and crucial tipping point. So this is my alma mater. This is a corner of the Berkeley campus. And there's the music building over there, and there's the architecture building. It was less than a 5-minute walk apart. If the walk had been any longer, let's say it had been maybe a 7-minute walk between the buildings, I don't think I would have double majored. It would have been too much work. As you've seen earlier, I'm also one of the founding students of Experience Institute. I still maintain it's one of the best decisions I've ever made. Thanks, Victor. So right now, I'm in Seattle. I'm currently at the architecture firm NBBJ. We do a lot of projects for large corporate tech companies such as Amazon or Microsoft, but I've also gotten to work on a lot of small nonprofits, arts and community and writing. So that's my background, music and architecture, studying sound and space. But you notice I added emotion in there, right? And so where do I start exploring emotions? I would say that comes out in my side projects. So all of you are creative people here. You know that you have a lot of ideas all the time. That video that was played at the very beginning with the fish, it's like, oh, there's so many fish, and maybe this isn't the right fish for this client. And you have a lot of ideas that don't always fit into your normal work. And I try to make sure I carve out time and space to do weird side projects, essentially. It's so I don't get too self-conscious about what I'm making. It makes me feel free to experiment in new mediums. If I get inspiration from a really odd source, then I can like take that project and run with it. And this does feed back into my professional work. Well, let's start off with this one. So back in May, I found out that Google was feeding romance novels to its artificial intelligence engine to make its products more conversational. So basically, it was making the Google AI read a bunch of smutty romance novels to make it learn how to speak like a normal human being. So it turns out romance novels, because they have quite simple language and the plots aren't too complicated, it actually helps a neural network like learn about like basic conversation and communication. So I was inspired by this, and so I thought about, well, if we're teaching a bot to read romance novels to make it more human, can I teach a bot to write romance novels to maybe make it more human? I don't know. So I don't really like romance novels at all, but I really like food. So I spent a Sunday afternoon writing food romance bot. It's a bad romance novel auto-generator. So it makes food-themed bad romance novel excerpts. It's a Twitter bot. So it'll say things like, "Hello," he said in a voice thick as pumpkin pie filling. "You may call me Herb. He was the most gorgeous man she had ever seen." Or, "She met his bean brown eyes with her own, leaning into his brown sugar caress. It's always been you," he said gingerly. So this is a real bot, and it just sits in its own little corner of the internet. You're actually the first group to ever see it. I haven't publicized it at all. And it just sort of churns out little romance novel excerpts. I did time it for a while. I would go out around lunchtime. Okay, so another project. So this is a series of misfortune cookies. There was a time when I was working on an art installation for a building that was going to be up for, the lifetime of the building. It was like, they're like, okay, this is going to be up there permanently, and it's going to be up for 100 years, and when the building gets torn down, this is the part they're going to save. Like, it was on reclaimed teak. I'll actually talk about it later. It's this reclaimed teak piece, and I was like, I spent a lot of time on it. I was like, okay, this is great, but I really wanted to do something that wasn't supposed to be lasting or profound or, well, fortune cookies. They say things like, "You're too late," or this one, "She never really loved you." I give out a disclaimer when I'm giving these out. I try to make sure, like, there's a whole thing I say, like, make sure you're not going through a breakup or a loss, crisis in faith, or, any sort of, like, thing, a negative and a negative interaction. They actually taste pretty good, though, too. So it helps. So I consider everything to be a project. I consider myself to be a project in progress. So words are actually one of the trickiest mediums for me to work with. I really prefer visual or oral or spatial design. I feel like I can get my ideas across. It just seems more natural. And if I could say things properly with words, I wouldn't have to make art. But there was a point in my life when I realized I had messed up a couple relationships with people, and I really wanted to apologize, but I didn't know how. And so I think I had my heart in the right place, but it's like, oh, how do you approach this apology? How do you go to this person and try to make up for it? So I made these cards. On the front, they say, "Sorry for being shitty." on the back, they're a how to apologize for people who need a little extra help. So it's a dear name of wronged, the person that you're apologizing to, just in case you were confused. I'm sorry that I did this thing. It happened because of lame excuse. It says lame excuse because it is a lame excuse, but you know that. I'd like to make it up to you by attempt at reconciliation, because it's not a real apology unless you're saying why it's not going to happen again, or you're explaining why it happened. Again, I'm honest adverb, sorry, and I hope in the future we can, there's a checkbox, so you can choose if you, friends, say hello in passing, or lovers, or not, checking that box, and then sincerely, sorry person. And yes, these are postcards, so you can fill in the address and just send it off to the person you wronged. Oh. Again, I just released these. They'll be on sale if anyone wants them. I need a lot. They're not all sad. I really like playing with moments of delight. So this is part of a series of street signs hidden around Seattle. There's a lot of construction going on in Seattle right now, and they look just like normal construction or parking signs, like notice, caution, attention. I try to define delight as those unexpected positive moments. It's the thing that you're not expecting, but is like the little lift to your day. And I try to incorporate this as much as I can in the work I do at NBBJ. So this sign, attention, you are wonderful and deserve every happiness. And yes, Weird Side Projects is a real site, WeirdSideProjects.com. So this is where I put all the semi-anonymous little things I'm exploring, and emotions and apologies and chocolate feet and, just like exploring mediums and other things. And I try to keep myself accountable to, like, even if this thing seems silly or it seems like I'm the only one who will get any use from it, or that, like, oh, okay, this is embarrassing. I think it's important to still push yourself in those ways, and even if you can't do it at work, to like keep it safe and do it outside of work. So all these things, music, architecture, Weird Side Projects, they feed back into my day job. So I work at Studio 7. It's the Experience Design and Environmental Graphic Design studio. I work with Sam Stubblefield, who's one of the presenters from last year. He's a dear friend and mentor. And so experience design is a little bit of an open-ended concept. Sometimes people think of it as user experience design, or it's defining how people look at things. I sort of think of it as emotion and story. So by emotion, I don't mean like feelings or just being happy or sad, but it means starting with emotions you want to evoke and the story you want to tell, and having that inform your design going forward. So that means using any medium, light, color, smell, to tell that story and evoke those emotions. And you're not just appealing to the visual sense. We have so many other senses, of course, too: hearing, touch, even your sense of time or your sense of movement and balance. So using a combination of mediums to craft an experience isn't actually a new thing. Old churches are actually some of the earliest and most effective examples of experience design. Like Brad said earlier about the power of architecture to evoke wonder, well, early churches needed a way to inspire awe and a sense of the divine, especially in a population that was often illiterate. So let's take this cathedral in Florence as an example. So first, the architecture actually constructs a narrative by how the single individual walks through the space. So you enter on that far side over there. You go through the nave, which is this the aisle going through here. And then it opens up into the transept, this crossover here. So you have a lower ceiling, which then opens up into this higher dome. It creates a procession. So you're going through this bar space, and then you see this large and beautiful dome, and the space opens up to hundreds of feet. That gives you a little bit sense of awe, if any of you have been in some of these buildings. And then, of course, there's this mural. There's also dozens of stained glass windows illustrating stories, and those sort of greet you as you're also going through the space. So that's an example of architecture working with graphics to create an emotion. But what happens when you now add sound? So that piece was actually composed for that space to be performed in that space back in the 1400s. It takes advantage of a lot of the resonance of the cathedral. It uses long notes, so you don't have a whole lot of like fast staccato notes in this large space that echoes. So that's an instance of architecture, graphics, and sound all combining together to craft an experience. So I'm going to talk about some of my work and the stories we wanted to tell with these pieces. So this is the Seattle City Light Denny Substation. It's a building done by NBBJ. And substations transform and distribute electricity throughout the city. And usually they're just a bunch of ugly blocks inside a fence. I actually had a really hard time finding a picture of a substation because people don't take pictures of them. So seeing that this building will be in the heart of a neighborhood and in the heart of a community, it's actually right outside our office, so that was extra incentive. The architecture team did a really good job giving it an approachable form and giving it community amenities. Like, this looks nothing like a typical substation. There's a dog park, there's a community center, there's all these art installations, there's even little call-outs carved into the ground that show you where you are in the city. And so I worked on the exhibit design for this space with our studio. And so I first started it with thinking about the story of this exhibit. The prompt I was given was the future of power, which is quite open-ended. And the thing is, when people think about the future of power, they usually think of the electric car, or they think about really efficient batteries, or they think about like, oh yeah, we can all have a generator in our house. But what I was thinking was the future of power isn't just an electric car, but it's also the rickshaw. Like, it's not just about advances in technology that will make us smarter, faster, better, stronger, but it's about us being clever. Like, while technology is smart, humans are clever. We're able to do a lot with so little, and so the future of power means it's you choosing to walk to work instead of driving. It's you being able to turn your lights off when you're not using them, simple things like that. But it's all about power and electricity enabling us to do the things we want to do, not about power itself. So that story informed all the elements in this space, everything from the Kinetic infograph in the back to some of the capacitive touch tables. I stuck a very strict no touch screens mandate because this building is actually net positive. It has solar panels, so it produces more electricity than it uses, which is really awesome. So to reduce power usage, I made sure there were no touch screens. But we could tell a lot of stories with the analog elements as well. My favorite part that I worked on was that blue wall in the back. So from far away, it looks like water. And that references hydroelectricity. 90% of Seattle's power comes from hydroelectricity, which is pretty impressive. But actually, from close up, it's a data visualization. there's 408,000 ratepayers who get power from Seattle City Light. And each of those lines represents the power usage of each of those 408,000 ratepayers. This is a data visualization that I did in processing. It's a creative coding language that's friendly to artists. And so it's sort of saying like, hey, you're in here too. When you come to this exhibit and you look a little closer, you can also find yourself in the future of power. So this was another installation. This was the one that actually spurred Misfortune Cookies, not that they're related at all. So we were given a lobby in one of the buildings that the architecture team was working on. And it was for a large online retailer that started out as a bookseller that you may have heard of. They're based in Seattle. Yeah, okay. So we were given this space, and here's a rendering of the lobby. And we thought about doing this barcode graphic on the wall to reference this company's background as a bookseller. So we're like, oh, barcode graphic on these beautiful reclaimed teak panels. But then we thought about like, oh, literature. You know, if we're filling the barcode, the bars of the barcode with words, essentially. But we're like, that doesn't seem quite right yet, just filling it with any words. But what about thinking about like how literature has inspired journeys? So we thought about like human discovery and exploration into the unknown. So there's actually thousands of words on this large barcode wall referencing human exploration. So it's all in chronological order in the original language, starting with the Odyssey. That excerpt over there from 8th century BC. It's one of the oldest works in Western literature. The Ramayana, one of the great Hindu epics. Going into Journey to the West, and then the Lewis and Clark's journals from their travels across the US, transcript from the Apollo 11 moon landing, and then finally ending with day one in binary. So day one is a phrase that's often used by this company, and it's talking about treating every day like it's day one. What are you going to do, and what are you going to discover on day one? So as a whole, it's about the stories of humans first crossing a country, and then crossing a continent and an ocean, and then going into space. So it's like, well, what's day one now? You're a part of day one. What is the next frontier? So this other project was a small weekend installation. Well, it took more than a weekend to build, but it was for a weekend for Seattle Design Festival. It's called A Fine Line, and we wanted to address the public perception of homelessness by using stories and interactive art to try to encourage empathy. So it was an interactive survey. Every visitor was given a piece of string and told to weave their answers to these questions around each string. No, pole. So you have a piece of string, and you're like, oh, I'm I'm 12 years old, and yes, I was born in Washington. It started off easy questions, but then we had questions like, how comfortable do you feel expressing your sexuality? And that was a really good talking point, because 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBT. And a lot of those kids are homeless because their families wouldn't let them stay when they decided to identify that way, or decided to tell their families they were identifying as LGBT. So you could see how your answers differed from all the other participants. So this helped highlight similarities and differences, and showed that how sometimes it's just a very fine line separating you from the person on the street. It was also a really good talking point when we had people think about privilege and what you're very lucky to have and what some people aren't so lucky to have. So sometimes we're just thinking about what stories in your everyday experience. More technical projects. It's not about trying to make a statement or trying to get people to think about something else, but just how can we make your everyday life just a little bit better? How can you just make people be a little more comfortable? So this is a project I worked on with the NBBJ Design Computation team, and it's addressing the open office. So we know there are so many benefits to an open office plan. You can see all your coworkers, it helps foster relationships, but there's also a lot of downsides if any of you have ever worked in an open office. It gets to be pretty noisy. You know what everybody's talking about all the time. And sometimes it's too cold because you're sitting by the windows, or it's too hot because you're sitting by the windows. So we're thinking about, like, how can we create a better everyday environment? So this is called Goldilocks. It's an experimental sensor network and app that helps you find the perfect spot in your building. Not too hot and not too cold. So it measures sound, temperature, light, and motion. So we actually had the sensor array set up in our New York office. So for example, your coworker's talking on the phone for too long, pull up this app, you can find another spot in the building that's a little quieter. So sound. Go into my sound projects. Architects are primarily visual, asterisk. A lot of us are primarily visual. Architecture is taught with like sketches, renderings, images, sometimes tactile, especially when we're making models. But of course, we have other senses. Our ears are actually as good an imager as our eyes. Our brains take in this audio information to help create 3D space. Your hearing is always on, and it's omnidirectional. It's sort of a safety thing built from survival. If there's like a lion sneaking up on you from the savannah, you don't need to turn your eyes to know that it's there. So this was for a lobby space for a large tech company based in Seattle with a history in online retail. I think that works for NDA, right? So we had a lobby space, and we thought about a daily touch point. So when you go through a building, the lobby is the first thing you enter through, and it's the last thing that you interact with when you leave. And we thought about how we wanted to maybe elevate how people felt when they entered the building every day to work. It's about creating an atmosphere for the space, though. This was using sound, but it's not a concert, it's a touch point. It's an installation that you walk through in the morning and you walk out when you're going to lunch, or as you walk in and out through the day. So we sort of figured out how like an evening would feel different than a morning, or a Tuesday feels different from a Friday. And we tried to quantify all these things. So we were like, okay, we're going to build a sound installation, but it shouldn't be repetitive. Like, we really don't like repetitive things. If you hear the same sound over and over and over again, you're going to tune it out. It's not going to have any effect on you. So how do you write music for forever? So we worked with this idea of cycles, which is a concept inspired by Javanese gamelan, Indonesian percussion. So you have cycles of different lengths. So for example, if one cycle is a unit of 4, you have another cycle, unit of 8, 12, etc. And also this idea of layers, like sticking certain cycles with certain factors. So for example, there's a cycle for like time of day, and there's a cycle for day of the week, or a cycle of time of year even. So you have all these cycles turning at different times. So here's when all the music composition part came in. I wrote hundreds of sound clips in Ableton Live. It's music software. They're written in different instrumentation. I took into consideration things like, we don't like extended dissonance. It also makes us uncomfortable. Humans also don't really like sine waves, the pure tones. And there are certain sounds that we're drawn to or we're more familiar with. So for example, here is one of the clips. So that very short clip is associated with evening. We also like natural sounds compared to unnatural sounds. So we recorded all these found sounds from around the world to capture a sense of place. We have recordings from lakes in Washington to train stations in Paris. This is rain on a metal roof. So then all these clips, the composed sounds and the recorded sounds, were all sorted and coded into MaxMSP. MaxMSP is another programming language that is also very friendly to visual people. I set triggers for different factors like times of day, days of the week, temperature, weather, what time the sunset was happening. Made sure to associate different types of clips with different factors so they wouldn't overlap. So for example, a lower clip would always be associated with day of the week, and then things that were associated with temperature would be a different type of instrumentation, so you wouldn't get like clashing marimba clips all the time. For hardware, I used directional audio speakers. So we used subwoofers for the lower frequencies, but since it was a lobby space and we wanted to control it, we used directional audio speakers. So they essentially focus sound as a spotlight. It's super interesting. It's like, it doesn't bleed out. You can have a very narrow focused cone. So we wouldn't have the sound bleeding everywhere else. So for example, with all these layers combined and triggered by different factors, but again, it's a very short touch point as you walk through. This could be the sound when you're leaving on a warm Thursday evening. Again, you're walking through this space as you leave. There's 20-foot ceilings, teak, and then you open the door to leave into the city. So that was an extremely involved and complicated project. I took like 3 weeks off afterwards. So that involved composition, recording, coding, hardware, tech. It was fairly daunting, to say the least. However, if you don't think you can write a symphony, you can still use sound to help tell a story. So some friends of mine were doing an artist residency. They were making a lot of kinetic sculptures that were activated by the internet. So they had this theme of natural and unnatural phenomena and oceans and celestial bodies. And so they asked me to activate this piece with sound. It's actually a very simple setup. It was 2 directional audio speakers reflecting off of a rotating disc in the middle, this rotating disc. The sounds bounce off of this installation, and they collide and they spin back around the room. So I thought about rotation and linearity and time. And here's a clip. So there's 2 parts. One part is the probe Voyager flying through space. So we launched the Voyager probe in 1977, and now we shot it off in a straight line, and now it's billions of miles away and still sending signals back to us. It's because we wanted to see what was out there, right? And it also has a record, the golden record, that has pictures of things on Earth and also has sounds and a map back to find Earth. But that was the space sound you heard. The other sound is this Kawaii Bird. It's a male bird calling for a mate, because that's what they do. However, this is the last known recording of this bird. It's from 1987. They actually go extinct shortly after. This bird was one of the last ones, but it doesn't know that. It may never have met any other birds. But it's still there just calling out, because that's what it's supposed to do. So here we have the spinning disk with the sounds of Voyager, our interstellar probe that we shot out into the universe. And then we have the sounds of this extinct little bird calling out for a mate, and these two sounds meeting and spinning and going out into the void. So I have sound used with architecture in this lobby installation, and then sound used in an art installation. But what if you want to use sound in one of your other projects and you really don't see a spot for it? You're like, okay, I really want to use sound, I want to squeeze it into this project. Well, this is the Curiosity rover on Mars. And it landed on August 5th, 2012. And on August 5th, 2013, it did this. So I'm sure you all know this is Happy Birthday. So our brightest minds here on Earth managed to send a rover all the way to Mars. And so it makes a series of beeps and whistles as it's measuring soil samples. But not only did we send a rover to Mars, they decided they wanted to teach it how to sing. We thought it was important. So there are many different ways to craft experiences, from a large scale like a city block or a cathedral, or a small scale like hidden in a park or a little corner of the internet. I'd like you to think about what stories you'd like to tell and what mediums you'd like to tell them in. So next time you're designing a building or a greeting card or an app, think about how you can weave in story to make it just a little bit more, just adding a little bit of unexpected delight. Think about how you can get it to sing. Thank you for listening.